13 days to Doomsday, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world stood still. In the October heat of 1962, an invisible clock began to tick, each second bringing humanity closer to the unthinkable. The scent of salt water and gun oil filled the air over the Caribbean, where American warships cut through the waves, their silent passengers bracing for what might come. In Washington, deep within the White House, a man sat at his desk, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. President John F. Kennedy gazed at the grainy black and white images before him, his face unreadable. Missiles, Soviet nuclear missiles, hidden among the sugarcane fields of Cuba, aimed directly at the United States. 1,200 miles away in Moscow, another man stood in a cold, dimly lit office. Nikita Khrushchev, first secretary of the Soviet Union, leaned over a desk covered in maps and red-marked reports. He had gambled, placing his weapons on America's doorstep. And now, the Americans had seen them. The air in Washington was thick with tension. Generals, advisors, and cabinet members argued in hushed but urgent voices. Some called for an immediate airstrike, others warned of nuclear war. Kennedy listened, eyes heavy with exhaustion, the weight of the world pressed down on his shoulders. One wrong move and cities would burn. Then came the announcement. On October 22nd, the world held its breath as Kennedy's voice echoed through radios and television screens. He spoke of Soviet missiles in Cuba, of the threat they posed, and of the blockade that would begin at dawn. The oceans turned into a battlefield of nerves. U.S. Navy destroyers spread across the waters like a steel web, standing in the path of Soviet ships. The world watched in frozen silence as those vessels, carrying unknown cargo, inched closer and closer. In Cuba, Fidel Castro walked the narrow streets of Havana, his people whispering in fear. He knew his island had become the center of the world's deadliest standoff. He had welcomed the Soviets and their missiles, but now he watched the sky, wondering if American bombers would darken it before the week was over. In the heart of the Pentagon, a red phone sat on a desk, untouched but waiting. Communication was fragile. Any misstep, any misunderstanding could ignite war. October 24th. The Soviet ships kept sailing, U.S. warships held the line. The world stood on the precipice of destruction. October 26th. A letter. Khrushchev offered a way out, removed the blockade, promised not to invade Cuba, and the missiles would be dismantled. The next day a second letter came, this one demanding the removal of American missiles from Turkey in exchange. In the war rooms of Washington, men argued once more. The military wanted a show of force, but Kennedy knew force meant fire, and fire meant millions of lives lost. Instead, he took a gamble of his own. He ignored the second letter and responded only to the first. The minutes crawled. The world held its breath. And then, October 28th, Khrushchev relented. The Soviet missiles would be removed. The world exhaled. The crisis had passed, but something had changed. The Cold War had nearly burned into an inferno. And now, every leader knew the cost of brinkmanship. The nuclear age had come to the edge of the abyss and pulled back. Yet the shadows of those 13 days never faded. The ocean waves that had once carried warships still whispered their secrets. The fields of Cuba, where missiles once stood, remained as silent witnesses to a moment when the world nearly ended. The clock had stopped. But it would never be forgotten.